I found out my bonus was 0 on a Wednesday morning, in the most boring way possible. No dramatic email, no meeting invite with a subject line like urgent, just a pay stub in the employee portal. Same layout, same dull font, except one line looked like someone had erased a month of my life with a single keystroke. Performance bonus. Leo don dobrodush. I stared at it long enough that my coffee went cold. This wasn't some nice-to-have end-of-year thing. It was a written part of my compensation plan. We'd been told, repeatedly, that if we hit the targets on the migration project, there would be a payout. My manager didn't just hint at it, he used it like fuel. Late nights, weekends, missing my brother's birthday dinner, the constant just push through this sprint talk. It was the carrot that made all the normal corporate pain feel temporary. And we hit the targets, not sort of, not we tried, we hit them. The client signed off early. The CFO praised the cost savings in an all hands. My manager took credit in a slide deck that literally had my work in it. So when I saw you resign, my first thought wasn't anger. It was, that's not possible. I refreshed the page like it was a glitch, logged out, logged back in, still 0. Then my stomach did that slow drop, the one you get when you realize something is wrong and the wrongness has shape. Not a mistake. Something deliberate. I work in operations, mostly project controls and reporting, so I'm used to living inside spreadsheets and systems. I also know how payroll works at a basic level. Bonuses aren't magic. They're coded. They're approved. They go through workflows. People touch them. And when people touch money, there's always a fingerprint. I opened the PDF version of the pay stub and looked closer. The bonus line wasn't blank. It wasn't missing. It was there like a decision had been made and recorded. Under it was a smaller code I'd never paid attention to before. Bonus PRJQ4. Next to it, a note field that was usually empty had 2 words. Not eligible. Not eligible. I'd been eligible enough to be asked to cover for a senior analyst when he quit mid-project. Eligible enough to get Slack messages at 10:47 p.m. from my manager with quick question that was never quick. Eligible enough to be the guy who fixed a broken reconciliation process over a weekend because the finance team needed it Monday. But suddenly, I was not eligible. I sat there listening to the office wake up around me. Printers, chairs, someone laughing too loud near the break room, and I realized another thing. Nobody had said a word. Not a single teammate had messaged me like, "Hey, did yours look weird?" There was no chatter, no confusion, no angry group chat. Either everyone got paid and I didn't, or everyone got hit and they were too scared to talk. I did the normal thing first, the polite thing. I emailed payroll. Subject: question about bonus, line on pay statement. I kept it short, attached the pay stub, asked if there was an error, added my employee ID. No emotion, no accusations. Then I waited. Payroll at our company was a shared services team in another state. They were good people, but they were also trained to be a wall. If there was even a whiff of compensation dispute, they kicked it to HR. If it was bonus eligibility, they kicked it to the business. A few minutes later, my manager walked by my desk and gave me a quick nod. "Morning," he said, casual. I watched him like he was a stranger wearing my manager's face. He didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the payout, didn't do the usual good job team thing he loved when there was an audience. He just kept walking. That's when the anger finally showed up. Not loud, not explosive, just a clean, sharp heat behind my ribs. Because if it was a mistake, he would have been confused too. And if it wasn't, he already knew. I pulled up the original compensation plan from my onboarding folder. It was a PDF with a signature block, dated 2 years ago, clearly stating the bonus structure. Project-based bonus, tied to company performance and individual eligibility criteria, which mostly meant you had to still be employed on the payout date and not be on a performance improvement plan. I wasn't on a PIP. My last review was solid. I'd gotten a merit increase 3 months earlier. So what did not eligible mean? I opened my calendar and searched for pipe, just in case there had been some meeting I'd forgotten. Nothing. Searched for performance. Just normal check-ins. I checked my HR portal. No warnings. No documentation. Nothing. This was being done somewhere else. I started doing what I always do when something doesn't add up. I pulled data. Not hacking. Not anything stupid. Just the stuff I had legitimate access to as part of my job. Our project financial tracker had a tab for incentives, mostly for forecasting. I'd built half of it myself. I knew what it was supposed to look like. The tab was still there. But the numbers had changed. There was a line for bonus pool allocation that I remembered clearly, because I'd argued about it in a steering meeting. It had been $180,000 across our department for the quarter, based on hitting the cost savings benchmark. Now it said $120,000, and the date on the last update was last Friday. 2 days after the CFO praised the project in the all hands, my hands actually went cold on the keyboard, because if the pool shrank, it explained a lot. It explained why someone could justify cutting people. It explained the silence. It explained why my manager wasn't making eye contact. But it didn't explain why mine was 0. 0 wasn't a trim. 0 was a statement. I clicked into the changelog. The tracker was a controlled file with edit history. It showed the last person who edited it. It wasn't my manager. It was someone from finance, specifically a payroll liaison named Denise, who had access to comp codes and worked closely with our department head. I knew her name because she had been on a few calls about cleaning up labor allocations. She was always polite, always efficient, the kind of person you barely notice until your paycheck is wrong. I sat back and did something I almost never do at work. I stopped and thought. If I marched into my manager's office with this, he'd either shut me down or tip someone off. If I went to HR, it would turn into a misunderstanding and die behind a locked door. If I complained loudly, I'd be labeled a problem. So I did the only thing that felt safe and powerful. I decided to build a timeline. I opened a blank document and started listing facts with dates. Pay date, bonus code, not eligible note, original pool amount, updated pool amount, last edit date, editor name. I didn't write feelings. I wrote proof. Then before I could talk myself out of it, I messaged one person I trusted in the company, Sam, an analyst on another team who was blunt and had zero interest in office politics. Quick question, I typed. Did your bonus come through normal this pay period? He replied 3 minutes later. Mine's weird. Lower than expected. Why? I stared at that message and something clicked into place. It wasn't just me. And if it wasn't just me, then somebody had made a choice about who deserved money and who didn't. I minimized the chat window as my manager approached again, this time holding a folder, like he was busy on purpose. He stopped at my desk, smiled without teeth, and said, "Hey, when you get a sec, can you swing by my office later? Just a quick touch base." "Sure," I said, matching his tone. He nodded and walked away, and as soon as he turned the corner, my inbox pinged. A reply from Payroll. It was one sentence. Please contact your manager regarding bonus eligibility determinations. My pulse didn't spike. It steadied, because now I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't going to fix it. They were going to route me back into the same chain of people who benefited from me staying quiet. I opened my document again, added the payroll reply, and saved it twice. Once to my work drive and once to a personal folder I kept for pay stubs and tax forms. Then I looked at the time. My manager wanted a quick touch base later. Fine, I'd go. But I wasn't walking in there empty-handed. My manager's office smelled like stale coffee and lemon cleaner, the kind of neutral scent meant to calm people down. It didn't work. He closed the door behind me and leaned against his desk instead of sitting. Like this was going to be casual. Like we were equals. "So," he said, smiling lightly, "I heard you had a question about your bonus." I didn't answer right away. I set my laptop on the chair across from him, opened it, and turned the screen so he could see. I checked my pay stub, I said. It says I'm not eligible. His smile didn't disappear. It just froze, like someone paused a video at the wrong frame. Yeah, he said after a beat. That's what Payroll told me too. Why? He exhaled through his nose and finally sat down. It's not personal. Finance adjusted the bonus pool. Tough quarter, budget pressure, you know how it is. I nodded slowly. Then why is mine 0? He looked at me now, really looked. It's based on eligibility criteria. I meet the criteria. Well, he said, choosing his words carefully, there were some concerns raised about role alignment. That was a new phrase. I wrote it down in my head. What concerns? I asked. He shrugged. Cross-functional feedback, nothing official. No documentation, I said. No PIP, no warning. He leaned back. Look, I wouldn't get hung up on this. Bonuses fluctuate. That's why they're bonuses. That's when I realized something important. He wasn't defending a decision. He was repeating a script. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, okay, and stood up. As I reached for the door, he added, I'd really recommend letting this go. Pushing payroll issues can get messy. I smiled, genuinely this time. Thanks for the advice. I went back to my desk and sat there for a full minute without touching my keyboard. Then I opened Slack, not a group chat, not anything obvious. One-on-one messages, carefully worded, casual. Hey, random question. Did your bonus come in lower than expected? Can I sanity check something with you about comp? Am I crazy, or did the bonus pool feel lighter this quarter? I didn't send them all at once. I staggered them. I waited for replies. They came faster than I expected. One coworker sent a thumbs down emoji and said, Don't even get me started. Another said, Mine's about 40% of what I calculated. A senior engineer replied, I thought I misread the plan. Glad it's not just me. No one said 0. That mattered. By the end of the day, I had 7 quiet confirmations. Different teams. Same project. Same quarter. Everyone had been reduced. Only I had been erased. That night, I didn't log off early. I stayed late, not because I was working, but because it was quieter. Less traffic in the systems. Fewer eyes. I pulled up historical versions of the project tracker. Nothing restricted, just archived snapshots. I compared the bonus pool line week by week. The number didn't drop all at once. It stepped down. Gradually. Cleanly. Always on Fridays. Each adjustment was small enough to avoid triggering alerts. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Then I overlaid the dates with payroll cycles. The reductions always happened after performance sign-offs, and before payroll closed. Someone was shaving the pool after success was locked in when no one was looking anymore. And the money didn't disappear. It moved. I followed the allocation formulas, the percentages that were supposed to distribute evenly across eligible roles. They still added up to 100%, but the head count they were divided across had quietly changed. My employee ID was flagged as non-bonus bearing in a lookup table I'd never had a reason to inspect before. A tiny switch, one Boolean value, false instead of true. I stared at it, heart pounding because I knew exactly what that meant. When you remove one person from the pool without reducing the total percentage, everyone else's share goes up. My 0 didn't just save the company money. It paid other people more, and whoever controlled that table controlled who benefited. I checked who had access. There were only 3 names. My manager wasn't one of them. HR wasn't either. Finance owned it. Specifically, a small sub-team responsible for manual adjustments and exception handling. Denise's team. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. At this point, I could have stormed into HR with screenshots. I could have emailed finance leadership. I could have blown it up. But I didn't. Because something felt off. This wasn't sloppy. It was too precise, too repeatable, too quiet. People don't risk their jobs for one quarter's bonus. They do it when they've been doing it for a long time. I checked prior quarters. Same pattern. Different names removed from eligibility. Always one or two. Always roles that wouldn't question it too hard. People who were competent, but not politically protected. And the same names consistently benefited from the redistribution. Higher than average bonuses. Every time. The realization hit me slowly, like pressure building in my ears. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. I closed everything and went home, my head buzzing. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw tables and timestamps. By morning, the anger had burned off. What replaced it was clarity. I wasn't going to argue about my bonus. I was going to prove what they were doing. And once you see something like that clearly, you can't unsee it. They thought I was just another employee who'd grumble and move on. They were wrong. Because that night, without meaning to, I stopped being the guy who hoped things would be fair, and became the guy who checks. The next week felt heavier than it should have. Nothing outward changed. Meetings still happened. Slack messages still flew around with fake urgency. My manager still said, "Appreciate you" at the end of calls like it meant something. But underneath all of it, there was pressure. I felt it the first time my access timed out mid-query. A system I used daily suddenly asked for re-authentication. Not unusual on its own, but it happened again the next day, and again. Then my manager stopped looping me into finance-related threads I'd always been part of. No explanation, just absence. I wasn't paranoid, I was paying attention. I pulled back, stopped digging during work hours, took notes by hand instead of screenshots. I knew enough about internal investigations to understand one thing clearly. If someone realizes you're watching them, they don't stop, they hide better. So I waited, and in that waiting, doubt crept in. At night, lying in bed, the questions started to circle. What if I was wrong? What if this was all technically within policy? What if I pushed this and all that happened was I branded myself as difficult? I wasn't junior, but I wasn't untouchable either. The company loved to talk about transparency and speak-up culture. In practice, those slogans lived on posters and died in performance reviews. By Thursday, the pressure turned personal. My manager called me into a conference room this time. No small talk. "I'm hearing," he said carefully, "that you've been asking a lot of questions about compensation." I met his eyes. "I've been asking about my compensation." He nodded slowly. "You need to be careful how that comes across." "To who?" He didn't answer right away. That told me everything. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "finance is sensitive. They don't like being second-guessed. I don't want this to turn into a bigger thing." "I didn't make it a bigger thing," I said. "I just asked why my bonus was 0. He sighed like I was exhausting him. Sometimes being right isn't the same as being smart. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal snap. I'd spent years believing that if you did good work and acted reasonably, things eventually evened out. That logic would win. That systems corrected themselves. But systems don't correct themselves. People correct systems when it benefits them, and defend them when it doesn't. I left the room knowing 2 things were now true. 1, my manager wasn't going to help me. 2, someone higher up knew I was looking. That night, I opened my laptop at home and did something I'd been avoiding. I reviewed the company's whistleblower policy. It was buried deep in the compliance section, written in the kind of legal language meant to discourage casual reading. But the core was simple. If you reported suspected financial misconduct through the ethics channel, the report went to an external firm contracted by the board. Not HR, not finance. The board. And importantly, reports could be anonymous. But anonymity limited follow-up. If you wanted action, you needed to attach evidence. Structured evidence. Timelines. Clear explanations. Exactly the kind of thing I'd been building. I didn't submit anything yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Maya, a former internal auditor who'd left the company quietly after a reorg. We'd worked together once on a controls review. She was sharp, and she didn't scare easily. I kept the message vague. Quick question. Hypothetically, if a bonus pool was being manually adjusted post-approval, where would you expect the trail to break? She replied the next morning, "It shouldn't. If it does, that's your answer." That line stuck with me. I went back through my notes and saw what I'd missed before. The adjustments were logged, but the justification fields were always generic. Strategic alignment. Role eligibility update. Phrases no one questioned because everyone assumed someone else had. No one owned the decision publicly, which meant no one could defend it when challenged properly. By Friday, I felt exhausted. Not physically, mentally. I was doing my job, pretending nothing was wrong, while carrying around the knowledge that a small group of people had been quietly skimming value from everyone else, and that the moment I pushed too hard, they could try to bury me. I understood now why people stayed silent. It wasn't fear of being wrong, it was fear of being alone. That afternoon, I got an automated email from IT. Your access to Project Financial Tracker admin view has been modified. Modified, not removed. But when I logged in, the change logs were read only. They'd noticed. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the edge of panic creep in. I was running out of room. If I waited much longer, the evidence would be harder to access. If I moved too fast, I could blow my chance. For the first time since this started, I considered walking away, letting the bonus go, updating my resume, pretending I'd never seen what I'd seen. It would have been easier. But then I thought about Sam, about the quiet frustration in those Slack replies, about the people who trusted the system because they didn't have time to audit it themselves. And I realized something else. This wasn't about my money anymore. It was about whether the people who built these systems got to decide who mattered inside them. That night, I didn't sleep much, but by morning the uncertainty was gone. I knew exactly what I had to do next, and once I made that decision, the fear didn't disappear. It just stopped being in charge. I filed the report on a Sunday night, not because it felt dramatic, but because it was quiet. No emails flying, no last-minute adjustments, just me, my laptop, and a checklist I'd rewritten 3 times to make sure nothing was missing. The ethics portal looked exactly like you'd expect. Plain, almost aggressively boring. No branding, no encouragement, just fields. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't speculate. I didn't accuse anyone by name in the opening paragraph. I laid out facts, dates, amounts, screenshots with hashes, exported change logs, copies of my compensation agreement, a table showing bonus pool reductions correlated with payroll cutoffs, another table showing redistribution to the same employee IDs over multiple quarters, and then at the end, one sentence explaining impact. These adjustments result in certain employees being excluded from bonus eligibility without documentation, increasing payouts to others. That was it. I attached everything and submitted it under my real name, not because I was brave, because anonymity would slow it down, and speed mattered now. The confirmation email came 10 seconds later, a case number, a note saying an external firm would review and follow up if necessary. I closed my laptop and sat there for a long time. Monday hit like a brick. By 9:12 a.m., my manager messaged me asking if I could hop on a quick call. By 9:20, finance leadership had scheduled a process alignment meeting for later that week. Invite list carefully curated. At 10:03, IT locked my access to the financial tracker entirely. No explanation. That was fine. I didn't need it anymore, because whatever was happening now was bigger than internal permissions. By noon, the mood in the office had shifted. You could feel it in the way conversations stopped when someone new walked by, in the way people checked their calendars twice before accepting meetings. At 1:30 p.m., Denise, the payroll liaison, sent a company-wide email. Subject: temporary delay in bonus reconciliation. She wrote that finance had identified inconsistencies and was pausing final bonus adjustments pending review. The language was careful, defensive, like someone building a fence after the fire had already started. An hour later, the CFO canceled his afternoon meetings. That's when it went from tense to chaotic. By Tuesday morning, there were calendar blocks popping up everywhere labeled audit support. People were being asked for documentation they didn't remember approving. Old approvals were suddenly important again. I kept my head down and answered only direct questions. When Audit reached out, external, professional, precise, I gave them exactly what they asked for. Nothing extra. No opinions. They didn't need them. Someone in finance panicked. You could tell because mistakes started happening. At 4:47 p.m. on Wednesday, Denise tried to push through a retroactive eligibility correction on my employee profile, backdated, clumsy, and visible in the system logs that Audit had already requested. It was the kind of move you make when you realize too late that the trail exists. The next morning, she was gone. No goodbye email, no out of office. Her calendar just vanished. HR sent a short note saying she was no longer with the company and that questions should be directed elsewhere. People whispered. People speculated. Audit didn't care, because by then they had enough. The real shock came Friday afternoon. A company-wide meeting, mandatory, cameras on. The CFO spoke for 12 minutes. He didn't say names. He didn't apologize directly. But he acknowledged material failures in internal compensation controls and announced corrective action. Bonuses would be recalculated, back pay would be issued, and a formal review of finance oversight was underway. When the meeting ended, my inbox exploded. Sam messaged me first. "Dude, check your pay stub." I did. The bonus line was there, not zero, the full amount, plus an adjustment labeled prior period correction. I sat there staring at the number, not feeling relief, just something settling, like a weight finally put down. But it wasn't over. 2 weeks later, my manager was reassigned. No announcement, just quietly moved to a special projects role with no direct reports. Finance leadership changed. New controls were rolled out. Dual approvals, locked tables, real oversight. And one afternoon, I got an email from the board's audit committee. They thanked me for raising the issue. They said the findings had gone back multiple years. They said corrective payments were being issued beyond just our department. They said this had mattered. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. The office felt different now, quieter, more careful. People didn't avoid my desk, but they looked at me differently. Not with admiration, not with fear, with awareness. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I was just done being invisible. The money hit my account on a Thursday. No announcement, no apology attached. Just a larger than normal deposit with a clean description and a timestamp that told me it had been processed manually. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. I just stared at it for a moment, then closed my banking app and went back to work. Because by then, the bonus wasn't the point. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new shape. Not better, not worse, just different. People were careful now. Finance double-checked everything. Managers stopped promising things they couldn't personally guarantee. Meetings that used to end with vague optimism ended with action items and owners. And me? I was left alone. Not punished, not rewarded, just untouched. That's when I realized the unspoken truth of it all. The system hadn't been designed to protect people like me. It had been designed to rely on us staying quiet. I got an email from HR asking if I wanted to discuss next steps. I declined politely. There was nothing left to discuss. A week later, a recruiter reached out on LinkedIn. Then another. Then another. Word travels faster than people think, even when names aren't used. One message stood out. A director at a mid-sized firm, blunt and honest. "We heard you don't miss details," he wrote, "and that you don't look away when things get uncomfortable." I took the call, not because I was desperate to leave, but because I finally understood. My value wasn't tied to loyalty or patience. It was tied to clarity. I gave my notice a month later, 2 weeks, professionally. No exit interview drama. My manager, new one by then, shook my hand and wished me luck, like this was all perfectly normal. On my last day, Sam stopped by my desk. "Glad you didn't drop it," he said quietly. "Me too," I replied. As I walked out, badge turned in, laptop wiped, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just the calm that comes from knowing you didn't let yourself be rewritten by someone else's math. They fixed the system because they had to. I fixed myself because I chose to. And that difference? That's the part they'll never be able to audit.